happy to be with you. Please give me a sign if the connectivity gets so bad that you can't hear me anymore. I will eventually probably turn off the video just so you, but I have a PowerPoint with me and it should be all fine. So my name is Anina. I live near Geneva, Switzerland, and I work for Sphere. And in Sphere, I work on policy and practice. And my presentation here to you is, not surprising, around the Sphere standards. And I think it's important for you to hear this presentation because when you hear standards, you immediately, often people immediately think about something very strict and very structured and very boring and not at all conducive to thinking yourself, because, well, the standard is there and it tells you what to do. And I think that Sphere and other standard handbooks suffer from that perception to a certain extent. And I'm here to try to convince you that the standards are actually not as boring as you might think. And I'm going to share my screen, which goes here. Voila, this is my first slide. And now we're going to this one. So just to start out by, so I don't know who you guys are. I know nothing about you. I hope that you know, that you have a bit of a sense of what Sphere is. That's why I put this image here for you, because Sphere is about almost 25 years old now. And it started out as an initiative to help the humanitarian sector become more coherent and more coordinated. And funny enough, me sitting here in Rwanda, one big push towards developing the Sphere standards was the very, suboptimal response, to say the least, a humanitarian response to the Rwanda genocide in 1994. There was also a sense in the humanitarian sector at the time that organizations needed to become more accountable for how they spent their money. That was the second drive to developing these standards. And over time, there have been 4 different versions, and you're way too young, but older people will know exactly which color handbook stands in their bookshelf. There's the generation of the blue, of the orange, of the green handbook, and so forth. So it is quite an amazing document, I would say, and it helps you make sense. It brings together to tell you where to start your thought process when you're presented with a really difficult and very complex situation. And we'll go into that in a minute. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to start a discussion on this one yet, but why should we have humanitarian standards in the first place? I'm going to give you what a teacher shouldn't do, but I'm just going to give you the answer on a plate. The first answer is coordination. Let's go back a step. How are standards being developed? They're being developed by, the humanitarian standards at least, by a whole sector, the humanitarian sector coming together and deciding for each element of intervention, for example, water sanitation or shelter or health or nutrition and food security, what is the minimum that we should think about, that we should plan with in order for a population that has been uprooted and maybe lives in a makeshift tent city or something, for them to survive, but not just survive, but survive with dignity and also be able to recover. And the real absolute baseline is that the situation should be such that there is that there are no illnesses that come out of a very unhealthy situation like cholera or something. And that's what the Sphere standards do. So they bring together the knowledge of an entire sector, and they decided what needs to be in place for people to survive and thrive with dignity. That means that they agreed on those standards. That means that when they come together for a coordination meeting, they can say, okay, let's look at Sphere. Oh, that's what Sphere says. Okay, let's see what our context says. Let's coordinate around the basis of the Sphere standards. It means predictability, because you can already know in advance that an absolute minimum for a certain population of, let's say, water, or let's say shelter space, or kilocalories per person should be X. You can start planning. Effectiveness, you can be timely, you can be relevant, because you can plan, because you know in advance what should be in place. Transparency is important, because you cannot just invent a response. You need to understand what the needs are of a certain population, and based on those needs, with the Sphere logic, you can say, this is what these people need, and you can name it, and you can fundraise for it, or bring it, or advocate for funds to be able to respond in that way. And that is transparent. You cannot give a lot to these people and little to those, because the basic need has been established. Assessment, planning, evaluation. As soon as you have standards, which, as you'll see, also have indicators associated to them, you can start playing around with those, and you can start evaluating and measuring over time. Quality of assistance provided, what needs to be in place, that's the assistance and the quality aspect of that, which eventually does lead, hopefully, to a certain professionalization of the humanitarian sector. Advocacy is important. You can, as I said, if you see there's such a gap between the need and the response, you can refer back to the standards and say, actually, according to Sphere, these people should have this much. They actually only have this much now, so there's a gap there, and you can advocate for funding. And accountability for resources and to people. That I put there last, but it's actually the key to everything that is in Sphere. You'll hear it again later. People are at the center. We work for the people whom we serve through humanitarian aid, and we have to start from their perspective and not from what we happen to want to provide, because we still have it in our warehouses, bluntly speaking. And that is the logic of the Sphere standards. So they give you a common language, common ground for discussion, and dialogue across sectors as well. So what is in the Sphere Handbook? There are 3 elements in the handbook: the why, the values behind humanitarian work, the how do we involve people at the center, and what are we actually, the technical standards. And on the right side, that schema, you also find that in the handbook. It has the big square, the principles and foundations. Those are 3 foundational chapters that are not so technical, but they lay out the lens through which you should then do the technical work, which is in those 4 green dots below: the water sanitation chapter, the food security nutrition chapter, shelter and settlement chapter, and health. And you can already tell that with those 4 sectors, you cover all immediate life-saving elements for people to serve, again, life-saving. You could also look at those elements in the handbook as the meta level, the organizational level, and the nuts and bolts level. The meta level is the rights, commitments, and obligations. Organizational is the people-centered approach, and the nuts and bolts are the technical standards. And here I'm sensing that I will just keep continuing as well, but maybe one or two of you want to give me an answer here. How do you measure dignity? Let me go back again one step. The key to understanding, to working with the Sphere standards is to start with this idea: people have a right to life with dignity. Be they in whatever dire situation and condition they are, their human dignity is still with them. You cannot take it away from them. Well, you can if you treat them in an undignified way. And so that's the key to Sphere. And so I'm just going to wait a couple seconds to hear if someone might want to say something about, what do you think is dignity, human dignity, and how would it express itself? So luckily, I have an answer to that too. I want to give you this to look at. The guy says, come on, it's better than nothing, isn't it? And it's a cartoon that reflects the values and the philosophy of the Sphere Humanitarian Charter, which is really the cornerstone to the Sphere Handbook, and which outlines this right to life with dignity. And this is clearly not a dignified way to give aid, but also to receive aid. It's just not okay. And it also means that the guys with the bunny suits have not thought about what the other people really need, but just brought them what they happen to have, again, in their warehouses. So I want to show you this image because it is key for you to think about if and when you work with the Sphere Handbook. And I have a little bit more slides in here than I will use, and I'll be happy to share the PowerPoint later with you if that's of interest. So let's quickly go through this logic of the Sphere Handbook. The logic starts with rights. People have rights under international law, including the right to protection, the right to water, the right to access to food, the right to access to health. Those are internationally enshrined rights, human rights. And those rights have practical meaning when considered as rights to access to life-sustaining support. And those rights are translated into standards, and the service supports can then be codified, yes, into those standards, and these standards can be measured with a few indicators. So you have the right, you say people have the right to a sufficient amount of water, that's a standard, and then you say what that means with a couple of indicators. And that's what makes the Sphere have a rights-based tool. I'm going to skip that one. So you have protection principles also in the handbook. I'm going to skip those as well. They give you a lens through which to do your work, always thinking about protection, about people's safety. The core humanitarian standard is another chapter in the book. It covers everything with people's right to a timely response, to organizations not doing harm when they do their work. There is a lot about information sharing with people, about a complaints handling mechanism that actually allows people to make complaints in a secure way. And it also covers humanitarian workers. It's very important. We often forget the stress that humanitarian workers are in is amazing. And there's often bad things happening because when you're super stressed, you don't function in a way that you would if you had a very secure and safe life and you could, stay calm. So to create the environment in which you can give good humanitarian work and be respectful to the people who receive the work, the aid that is in the core humanitarian standard. Now, let's look at one of the standards. And Diego knows that I picked this one because he knows my whole argument already. This is probably the most famous Sphere standard, and the one that people mostly get wrong. The idea here is simply that people have access to a sufficient quantity of safe water to meet their drinking and domestic needs. And you see how this standard is formulated. It's not, it's formulated as an outcome statement. In the end, after all the work we've done, people will have access to sufficient clean water. And furthermore, it is formulated in an extremely vague manner. What is sufficient? Well, that depends, right? Affordable, it depends on who those people are. Equitable depends a bit less because it simply means that everybody has the right to clean water, but the sufficient is a word that needs to be filled in with meaning. Every standard is then followed by key actions. And I just put one key action here as an illustration to show you what is the whole package for each of the standards. Those are actions that you can take for surface water sources. It depends whether that's actually something that is appropriate, that is used for your particular context. And then come the indicators. And in the last Sphere edition, we tried to make indicators that no longer have numbers in them, because you'll see numbers are very, very dangerous. It used to be one of the indicators was the average volume of water per person per day is 15 liters. And people thought, I know, okay, I need to do a water program. I know exactly how much water these people need. They need 15 liters per person per day. And then you calculate, you have your calculators, you put the number of people and okay, that's it. And that in many circumstances, you probably give way too little water. And in other circumstances, you may not have 50 liters simply because you don't, or you're in a desert and people don't have 15 liters even in normal times. And so the thinking is not everybody must get 15 liters, but the thinking should be, let's take 15 liters as sort of a baseline to start our reflection from there. And that's why the indicator here doesn't have a number. It just says, this indicator talks about the average volume of water used for drinking and domestic hygiene per household. You can also say per person, it doesn't really matter. Because you identify what average household is. And then it says, well, let's think about 15 liters per person per day as a basis from where we continue our thinking. And let's also be clear that the quantity that we will determine in the end will depend on context and on the phase of the response. And this logic goes for every single of the, I forget how many standards there are now in the handbook, around, oh goodness, around 100, I believe. I forgot, I used to know. That's the logic. An outcome statement that is an expression of a right, and then actions and indicators and guidance notes. And we'll come back to those later, and those I will skip. And the indicators I will skip too. And what I wanted to show really quickly is these are the standards in the WASH chapter. Hygiene promotion, water supply, excreta management, control, like rats and mosquitoes, solid waste management, and WASH in disease outbreaks in healthcare settings. Those are the sections, and then under those you have the standards. For the food security and nutrition, you have assessment, you have management of malnutrition, you have micronutrient deficiencies, infant and young child feeding, food security, food assistance, livelihoods. That's the breadth of that chapter. Shelter and settlement is a very simple chapter. You have planning of a site, and then location and settlement planning, living space, household items, technical assistance to rebuilding or retrofitting, for example, security of tenure, very important, as we have more and more urban refugees who need a place to stay, and environmental sustainability. And the health chapter covers health systems, but then also communicable diseases, child health, sexual and reproductive health, injury and trauma care, mental health, non-communicable diseases, very important in long drawn out emergencies, and palliative care, which I'm very happy about that we have it in the handbook now, because it concludes the life cycle, and having the right to a dignified death and not just a dignified life helps a lot, especially in traumatic situations. So the key to working with standards is to not just rush to any indicator that will help you calculate what you need and then just deliver that blindly, more or less, but it is to contextualize each standard. It means also you start by a contextual analysis. You understand what the situation is, what people's needs are, and then you look at the standards, how they then apply, which ones are needed. Not every standard is always needed. Not every organization can provide everything that's needed. Hence, again, the coordination, because you need to sit together as organizations, like let's say in a relatively confined example of a response, and say, okay, these and these and these are the needs. Who can take on what, and what are the levels of aid that we can agree on and that we have the means to do. And that kind of contextualization will be necessary wherever you work in a humanitarian intervention. And just to broaden the scope a bit of something like the Sphere Handbook, when I don't know if you remember or were aware, but in 2015 there were over 1 million Syrian refugees coming through the Balkans into Western Europe, and countries like Germany suddenly sat there going, "Oh my God, what do we do? Where do we put them all? How do we do this?" Sweden suddenly thought, we need. We don't know where to host those people and how to plan all that. So humanitarian aid is not limited to the global south by any means. And the German Red Cross has actually developed emergency sheltering guidelines based to a large extent on the Sphere standards. And there's also a Sphere in urban settings training that's upcoming soon, which shows also that there's Sphere is not just camp settings. Sometimes people thought, well, the whole idea was, it used to focus on African refugee situations, but it is way beyond that. And in fact, the one thing that's coming up now is, for example, Ukrainian refugees in the neighboring countries. And the question is, does Sphere apply there as well? Because those are highly developed countries. You don't need to count liters of water per person per day. But what you do need there, just as much as anywhere else, is to start by thinking about the people first, about what they need, and then build from that and treat them with dignity and provide them what they want and not whatever you have, and so forth. So there's a whole psychosocial well-being is key for those populations. And so the approach again is holistic. It's not just technical standards, is because you deliver those to people, to human beings who just lost everything. And you need to, and it's very easy to do your work because you're a technical expert, you're a wash expert, you're a shelter expert, you have your stuff, you bring it, you have your airplanes, you have your, and that's just not what's ultimately really always needed. I'm going to skip over that. Anyone who's interested in DRR and seeing how Sphere actually is useful for DRR. Here again, the idea that that every part of the handbook is useful and should be read in conjunction with other parts of the handbook, depending on what you need from it. And this is my key slide, really. And I won't take many more minutes, but we started a wee bit late, so can I just a couple more minutes? Standards, the way they're conceived in the Sphere Handbook, are meant to be empowering because they are based on people's aspirations, on people's needs, and people's rights. So that is a beautiful tool, but you can do a lot of harm with that tool by focusing exclusively on those few indicators or numbers, numeric elements that you need, that you believe you need for your intervention. And so the key is to keep two elements apart. On the one hand, you have a standard, which is a universal right, the right to water, the right to a roof over your head. And everybody has that same right. So you have the universality of the standard of rights and an equality in that, qualitative equality in that, on that end. And then you go into your context. And that's when you start to work with the indicators and you adapt them to your context. You work up towards whatever level you actually need over time. This whole, maybe the indicator tracking tables, you start from a certain value, you work your way up to the value that you actually need, but you may not be there from the beginning. It's okay, you have time, hopefully. And the logic in the contextualized side is you focus on needs and you focus on targeting. And that is and those two go together, but they need to be conceptually kept apart. And that's how you can work and adapt the standards in any context. And when you go back to this water supply standard, if you just turn the page, one more page, you actually go to the guidance notes and you see there's a whole section on needs, different needs at different times for different groups of populations, for different climates and so forth. And never, if you ever work with the Sphere Handbook, please read the guidance notes. Actually, a huge amount of thought has gone into those, and they're actually pretty great. Last little thing, I'll show you 4 images. And I want you to think about what could the standard be that those 4 images portray or suggest. And so what is the right expressed in those 4 images? People have the right to whatever, sort of that idea. And then what could be the indicator? So these are the 4. So again, I'm not going to ask you, it's okay, you can stay muted. But what could be the standard and what could be the indicator? that those 4 images showed you. And a suggestion would be that people can safely view the beautiful landscape. That's a colleague of mine who did that. We could also say people have the right to see to the other side of the wall. And one crate and the number of crates is the indicator. That's where you think about, okay, we need to work with crates. And you can start by thinking, by planning with about 1 crate per person, and you'll get there more or less. And then you become creative. Not everybody gets 1 crate, but you say, well, some people need more crates than others, right? Like this little guy didn't get enough crates, and maybe they all together won't have enough crates, so you need more than 1 crate per person. And so there's a whole game in there. Last thing, there are other standards like the Sphere standards. They are grouped into the Humanitarian Standards Partnership, which you find on this in this space. Sphere is hosting all those, and thank you. My name is Anina. I currently still work for Sphere, and from tomorrow, I actually already started with the CHS Alliance. I don't know if you know them, but I will be managing the revision of the core humanitarian standard, which I mentioned to you before. So if you're interested, stay in touch. Thank you.